right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our Heart to Heart series. I'm Kevin Ring, president of FAM. I'm excited today to talk about strategies and solutions for reducing our jail and prison populations during COVID-19. I have to say this has been a priority for FAM and a lot of other groups in this area. And as much as I know everybody, even outside of prison, is getting sick of this pandemic, and we're all thinking about what it means about whether they're going to open schools and stuff. The problem is so much more dire in our prisons and jails. And, being in touch with families every day, I think a lot of people are starting to forget about it, but these families aren't, because they're still chest deep in the first wave of this thing. And so while there's all this talk about what's going to happen this fall, there's still a lot of prisons and jails across the country that are dealing with it in a very serious way right now. And families are very concerned. And I said the situation's getting worse, and that's because, in some of these places, there's still not testing going on. And so families aren't aware of how serious the problem is, and they're worried about that. And they hear rumors about people being sick. We were getting tons of reports that corrections officers are not even wearing masks, which is the most basic thing they can do to keep people safe, not only inside, but outside prison. Families haven't been able to visit their loved ones for months. And I mean, a lot of us are going through that separation from families on the outside, but for there, it's much more acute because even phone call and email usage is limited. But then to go months and months and not be able to have an in-person visit, hug a loved one, a child or a parent, has been incredibly difficult. Now we're getting into summer, and a lot of these prisons aren't air conditioned, so people are hot, and it's making the conditions even worse. And with the loss of staff and these other shutdown conditions, the food is even getting worse. So, I was just talking to Lynn before we started, and I mean, one thing that people in prison count on was like getting some sleep and at least getting, meals. And right now, those things are jeopardized, which makes the whole experience 1,000 times worse. And so this is a crisis situation. As much as everybody's tired about hearing about it, people need to know that it's for many thousands of families across the country right now. This is a much, much more severe ordeal. And so we want to talk about things that Congress can do, working with states and locals to address this issue. It's late. There's been inaction for too long, but there are things they can do. And we have a great panel to talk about this. I'm going to briefly introduce Rob Sanders, who's the county attorney from Kenton County, Kentucky. Rachael Rossi, who is a friend of FAM, former public defender, former candidate for LA County District Attorney, former Hill staff. She's done everything. So she has a lot to share. But we want to start with a story and an individual who has experienced release and got out of harm's way, because this is not some abstract issue, and this is not some theoretical problem. This is about people getting their lives saved. And I want to start, so I'm going to talk to Lynn Reece first. And Lynn, I'm going to ask you to tell a little bit about your story, but I want to start by reading briefly from a letter you sent to FAM a few months ago from federal prison. You said, I'm now over 70 years old. I've paid off the $10,000 fine with prison wages. I've never been to solitary confinement, never had a fight nor any violence while here, no drug or alcohol infractions in here. My disciplinary record is clean. I live at a camp with no fences, no bars, no locked doors, posing no threat to anyone nor the public. My minimum out trustee status indicates that the BOP believes that I pose no threat to anyone. And surely that was true. And yet you were fighting like crazy to get released early when the disease hit. So can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yes. First, I want to expound on what's happening over at Seagoville in Dallas. And the reason why I want to expound on it, because 10 months ago, I was at Seagoville. And I transferred from Seagoville to Oakdale, Louisiana camp, which became another hot spot in the nation. And it was just like the Seagoville place. And people started dying. That's how serious the situation was. What the people don't understand on the outside, the general masses can't see, is that the prison system was ill prepared for this type of surprise, this type of pandemic. So they had no beds, no hospital space, nowhere to put these guys. So when guys started getting sick from the coronavirus, they were taking them to solitary. They were converting gyms into hospitals, putting beds and bunks in them. Visiting rooms, they were putting bunks in what used to be the visiting room because they didn't have nowhere to put these guys. And then they started getting sick. They were transferring them to the hospital. There were no ventilators or nothing. And I was at Oakdale when guys started dying. It was at this time that I contacted the family attorneys that I had been in touch with for 2 or 3 years and let them know how dire the situation was at Oakdale. And fortunately, the family attorneys got me an attorney who went to my trial court judge and explained the situation. And I, fortunately, unlike the other many guys behind bars now, I was released. But I look back on those situations that I was in 10 months ago and see what's happening in Seagoville, have more people testing positive for the coronavirus in Seagoville than any federal facility in the nation. And I just want to say, you know, like the sentences were like 10 years, 15 years, 12, whatever. But to not react to what's happening now with the pandemic is like sentencing a lot of guys to the death penalty. I have no idea what my status would be if I had not had the attorneys from FAM to go and talk to my trial court judge. Being Black and over 70, I was like highly vulnerable at that time. I could easily have been on a ventilator, could easily have died, because a lot of guys at Oakdale actually did die, you know. Yeah. And the problem is that we're locked into these dorms with 300 and 400 people in the dorms, and we're all using the same facilities, all use the same commodes, the same sinks, drink from the same water fountain, no masks, no gloves, and even the staff doesn't have PPE. So it's a really critical situation, and I think that they should come up with some type of demilitarized zone, because this is a war, some type of demilitarized zone to transfer the guys who have tested negative, who qualify for release, and let them stay there, you know, like 30 days and try to send them home. You know, even if necessity even if it means putting an ankle bracelet on or supervision or whatever, because to not act is like sentence them to the death penalty. And I understand that some guys have heinous crimes and some guys have super violent crimes and don't qualify for release. But for those that do, some type of action should be taken, or they'll end up with the death penalty.
Well, let me ask you this. How long did you serve before you got released?
I was in federal prison. I was in prison 25 years and 6 months. I had filed for compassionate release, and it had been pending for like 18 months, you know, because I filed it myself. I didn't have no money. I didn't have no attorney to represent me. So it was just pending before the judge, before the court. And had I not had somebody to represent me to actually walk my petition to the trial court judge, it'll still be pending. The warden at the facility where I filed my compassionate release application didn't even respond. The compassionate release program in the federal system is very, very slow and very seldom used. Mm-hmm. So that's why they changed the law in the First Step Act to allow the judge to intervene to release some of these guys, because some of the guys were dying in prison with their applications still pending for compassionate release. Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to be able to get mine to a judge because the system hadn't responded, but a judge stepped in and enabled me to get out.
Well, let me ask you this, because you mentioned that you were in a camp. And I think a lot of people, I've heard people say, you know, people in federal prison are the worst of the worst. And that ignores the fact that the federal prison population, 50% are in for drug offenses. They may not be minor offenses, but they're drug offenses. They're not violent offenses. And the states have a different breakdown. But you were in a camp. There's 25,000 people in camps, which have no fences around them. You know, you have freedom of movement. The thing that stops you from leaving is just that you don't want to, right? You don't want an escape charge. And so I don't think people realize that, you know, there's a lot of people who could be transferred to home confinement in a home sooner. Was that what you saw? Did you see a lot of guys who could have been let home earlier?
Yes, because like I was at a camp and I would get the keys to a vehicle and drive to work every day. I worked like 5 miles from the dorm that I lived in. And I would wake up in the morning and get the keys to a vehicle and drive to work. And then in the evening when I get out, I drive back to work. And you got so many prisoners, you know, who are under those kind of conditions, who, if they wanted to leave, they could have just drove home instead of going to work, just get on the interstate and come home. But they served their sentences and they're doing that time. And I don't think they pose no threat. A lot of us, you know, pose no threat. And then, you know, before the pandemic hit, we were dealing with a problem of mass incarceration. many of these guys had sentences that were very disproportionate to their charges. A lot of guys, like 4 or 5 grams of cocaine, will have like 20, 25 years, who should have been out anyway a long time ago. Some of these guys should be come home, and if nothing more than put on ankle bracelets till they finish their sentence.
Well, let me ask you this before I move on, and then we'll come back to you, but everyone's going to ask, how are you doing? How long you been home, and what are you up to?
Well, right now, I'm doing really good. And I can't explain what it feels like to have been locked up for a quarter of a century and to be home, you know? But it's difficult coming home in the middle of a pandemic, because 45 million people have filed for unemployment. And the problem that I had coming home was all of the government offices were closed, Social Security, Department of Public Safety. So this made it difficult to get like driver's license, Social Security cards, birth certificates. That made it difficult to get ID, because normally you get that at halfway houses when you're coming home.
Yeah.
But I got immediate release on a coronavirus release and didn't get to go through that process. So I've had to go online trying to get all these documents and IDs that I need. And to be out of the system for 25 years, the computer would frequently tell me, we can't verify your identity. So I like have to wait until everything open up and personally show up at these offices to really get all the things that I need to get going.
Yeah.
But fortunately, the government sent me a stimulus check. You know, the government sent me a stimulus check, and I've been doing okay because I got some excellent friends, and I've been doing all right here. You know.
All right. Well, that's
I've
good
got
to hear.
organizations that contacted me that want to send me to different type of trade schools, different type of vocational settings and everything. That people constantly call me. You know, people constantly trying to help me. All of the time they're calling me, send me clothes, you know, make sure that I'm doing all right. A lot of people out here want us to stay out here, and a lot of people involved in helping us stay out here.
Well, we're part of that, and we're great. We're glad you're home. I mean, really, really, really glad you're home. I know everyone's going to be excited to see your face. They've seen your story, and now they're glad to hear you. Rachael, one thing that Lynn mentioned was there was a change in the First Step Act. Compassionate release hadn't been used. I mean, a couple dozen people would get it a year. People would die waiting for it. Change in the First Step Act allowed people to go to court if they didn't get an answer, if they got the wrong answer, if they got denied, or if they didn't get an answer, they could go to court. What more could Congress be doing? And sort of like what are you working on that you think that could be helpful to give even more release options to sort of combat this problem?
Yeah, so we looked at, just like Lynn has sort of described, the history of compassionate release and how few people have ever really gotten it in the federal system is particularly appalling, because you have an increased aging population and you have an increased vulnerable population. And right now, that already existing situation is exacerbated by COVID-19, because that population is at the greatest risk of getting this disease and dying. And the Federal Bureau of Prisons, we've seen now, has the highest rate of deaths of any prison population in our country, almost 100 deaths from coronavirus. So it is a very dire situation. And so one of the things that folks on the Hill can start looking to do is, not only have we started to expand who can have, how quickly you can go to court and how rapidly the process for compassionate release is processed, but we need to look at how can we expand the populations of people who can gain access to compassionate release. So ordinarily, the group of people who can get compassionate release was pretty limited. It has certain age limits. It has certain requirements that you have to be extremely deathly ill. Well, now that's changing, because we know that if you just have diabetes, that places you at an increased and very dire risk due to COVID-19. So Congress really needs to take a look at what can we do, not only to expand access to courtrooms, but to expand access to what types of groups of people are getting out, to just really curb this scary situation in our prisons.
Yeah, and when I'm excited, and if people go to our webpage, they'll see that there's a bipartisan bill that's been introduced by Senator Durbin of Illinois and Senator Grassley of Iowa to, at least during this period of the pandemic, expand the criteria and limit the time people have to wait to get an answer from the Bureau of Prisons, because every day matters. So there's a proposal to do that. And then are there things that Congress could do to help? Because the federal prison population is the biggest system, but it's only one system. Most people are in state and local jails and prisons. What could Congress do to help, states safely decarcerate?
Right. So we've seen a lot of news coverage about the problems in the Federal Bureau of Prisons, but this is an issue that is affecting all of our jails and our state prison populations as well. We're now up to almost 60,000 people who are incarcerated in our country contracting COVID-19. We have over 650 deaths across the country. And so this problem is way beyond just the federal prison system, and we need Congress to take steps to assist state and local governments in releasing people and in providing treatment and testing. So one of the things that I joined was a task force. The Justice Action Network put together a task force with mostly sheriffs and prosecutors and folks who are the heads of a lot of these state prison populations, to explore what are the issues that we're seeing. Why are we seeing such increased rates of contracting COVID-19, and what do we need to do to help the states to make this crisis stop? And a lot of the things that we looked at were, first of all, specifically in California, we've seen a huge problem in California. We're like the second largest state to be having the increased deaths when it comes to COVID-19 in our jails and prisons. And one of the things that we've seen in California is that a lot of those reentry providers, Lynn talked about all the services and the needs when you get out of prison. A lot of those services are being shut down, or volunteers aren't able to volunteer due to the crisis. And so there's a lot of need on that reentry side. There's also a lot of need to simply incentivize states to start to look at who can we release, right? Oftentimes it may not be a first thought that releasing people is the right thing to do, but who are the types of populations that we can start to safely release? And a lot of states are looking at, those who are caught up on technical violations, those who are pre-trial, who haven't been convicted of anything, those who are nonviolent, drug offenders, and those who are nearing towards the ends of their sentences. These are a lot of the populations that we can start with, in addition to, of course, the medically vulnerable populations. So we've seen legislation introduced on the House side. Nadler and Congresswoman Bass introduced a Correctional Facility Emergency Response Act, which was part of the HEROES Act that passed on the House side in May. And what that bill would do is it would begin to incentivize states to reduce their incarcerated populations so that they come into compliance with CDC standards. So what that's essentially saying is we know that prisons and jails right now are not social distancing, not sanitizing, and not providing the masks and the sort of precautions that the rest of the country is being mandated to do, right? And a lot of that is because you just can't social distance in prison. And so what this bill would say is if you find ways to get in compliance with those CDC guidelines, the federal government will help you and will provide funding to help you make sure that that happens. So I think what's exciting about the conversation around this right now is that it's a bipartisan conversation. It's something that we're seeing Republicans, Democrats, we're seeing conservatives, liberals, and we're seeing prosecutors and defense attorneys all coming together saying, this is a crisis and we need to fix it. So I'm very hopeful that we can do more to curb the spread of COVID-19 in our jails and prisons.
Yeah, and Rob, you're a success story, and I want to talk about what you've been able to do at the local level and I know you're part of this task force, but I want to first ask about, your value and your motivation in this, because I bet nobody who knows you thinks you're soft on crime, or that your first instinct is just the welfare of people who are in prison. But what about the spread of COVID made you think, maybe we have to do something different, because we need more people to be thinking differently? So what was it that motivated you to think that?
Well, quite frankly, Kevin, one of my biggest motivations was being able to do my job. And when I say being able to do my job, I mean keep my community safe. And the best way for me to keep my community safe is to take the worst of the worst offenders, the most violent ones, the ones that are killing and raping and child molesting and the horrible people that we don't talk about releasing, and quite frankly, that we aren't releasing. I wanted to make sure that I cleared enough space so that I could keep those people behind bars where they need to be. And in order to do that, we had to look for the people that we could let out safely. A lot of them low-level nonviolent offenders, as we've all talked about, but we already probate or divert low-level nonviolent offenders to begin with. So the problem becomes we're talking about low-level nonviolent offenders that have failed probation or that have committed violations while out on bond. And probably the biggest problem that we've run into are people not showing up for court. And that's who really was clogging up our jail on the low-level nonviolent offense, is people that just couldn't play by the rules, so to speak. They couldn't get themselves through the justice system without stepping on their own foot and causing a judge to lock them up for one reason or another. So in order to make space to keep the most violent, the worst of the worst offenders in there, in order for people to understand the reason that I put people in prison in the first place, the most violent people in prison, is to keep the community safe, and what lengths we are willing to go to make sure we can still do that. That was my main motivation. Now, on top of that, there's also a compassionate part of this, and ironically, to hear you talk about the federal prison system and compassionate release, it almost makes me chuckle because it's such a giant bureaucracy that I can't imagine there being much compassion. It's such a dehumanizing process when you're talking about a bureaucracy that's that big. We don't have that on the state side so much. I recognize almost every one of my defendants' names. My office is responsible for prosecuting over 2,000 felony cases a year. But still, it's a big small town where I'm from, and even though we have over 150,000 people, probably over 165,000 people in my jurisdiction, the criminals tend to come back a lot, the same ones, and so you get familiar with them. They probably all know me, or at least think they know me. There is a human side to state court, and a lot of the folks that are in here, they've screwed up, they've broken the law, they've committed crimes, they need punishment, they need redirection. They need to pay their debt to society, and they're going to. Many already have. But those people that have committed low-level nonviolent offenses, they don't deserve a death sentence. They don't deserve to be locked in a room or in a cell or a dorm or anything like that where they can't be socially distanced, where they can't be separated from other people that have tested positive for coronavirus or displayed symptoms. We went to great lengths to make sure that we emptied out enough of our jail population that we could do that we could keep people who are in there, whether the worst of the worst violent offenders or whether they're low-level nonviolent offenders that have just screwed up repeatedly, that we could still keep them safe. And it's been a struggle. It's not been easy. Some people have not done us a whole lot of favors, haven't done themselves a whole lot of favors, and gotten themselves locked back up. But it's a process, and I guess in summary, it's twofold. It's one, making sure that we have the prison, or the jail space, the prison space, to put the worst of the worst in and keep the community safe. And the other side is just the compassion of realizing that there will be a day and a time when we can lock people up and punish them for screw ups. But if there's somebody that's just screwed up, now's not the time to be stuffing them on top of other people that we can't possibly let out.
That makes sense. And I think we have to find agreement where we can. And I think you're right that there's got to be a common understanding of, people who we can let out safely. And then there's going to be, some understanding that there's some people who are more of a threat to others. I would say on behalf of, our view is that nobody deserves a death sentence because of a pandemic sweeping through these prisons, but that even the people that you don't feel that you can safely release at least benefit from a prison not being jam-packed. And so
absolutely. They're ones that are also benefiting from this. When I say don't deserve a death sentence, I happen to be in favor of the death penalty, and I realize that's probably contradicts a lot of what your membership believes in, and I respect that. But that's part of my point, though, is that we have to make it safe to house the people that we can't safely let out. So even if they're in there for a violent offense, even if they're in there for some terrible crime, we have to be able to humanely keep them incarcerated so that the community is safe from them. And you know, the funny thing is, Kevin, a lot of people have a hard time understanding this when I start talking about the compassionate side. But if nothing else, there's a dollars and cents side of it too, that our county is responsible for the medical bills of every inmate. And if just one inmate ends up in the ICU or on a ventilator, that's hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of medical expenses that county taxpayers have to foot the bill for. So if nothing else, folks do understand the cost benefit side of it is that the more we reduce our jail population, the less likely we are to have to foot the medical bills if anybody, God forbid, gets seriously sick.
Yeah, and if they are using those medical services that, you know, if a hospital is overrun because of people who are in prison who get sick, that could affect their parents' ability to get those same services.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you though about what you guys have done with the county jail in the population reduction since this started. I know you've partnered with an organization called the Life Learning Center. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you've been able to achieve?
Sure. Well, back on March 1st, our jail population was 746 inmates. Now, not all of those are folks awaiting trial. A lot of those are state inmates, but we had 746 inmates in our county jail. We have cut the detention center's population as of May 1st down to 344. And that's as low as we got it. But that's really the 3-month stint where we were at the initial height of the coronavirus. Now we've creeped back up over 500 just about a week or so ago, and we are trying to cut that back down now to get it again to a more manageable population. For us, our target is 400 or less. What we've done with the Life Learning Center is they're an organization that does a phenomenal job of, they work with folks, not just people that are involved in the justice system, but with anyone from any walk of life that needs a helping hand, needs a leg up, needs job training, needs education, needs whatever it takes for them to succeed. The Life Learning Center literally removes all barriers, whether it's a GED or whether it's clothing, whether it's housing, food, childcare, you name it, healthcare. The Life Learning Center eliminates all barriers. And what we did, in addition to requiring folks that have addiction issues to go to treatment, is requiring everybody that we let out, whether it was let out pre-trial, whether it was let out on probation, diversion, shock probation, anybody that got out of our jail that didn't have to go off to another jurisdiction to deal with some other charges got sent to the Life Learning Center, so that hopefully we removed any barrier they had to being a law-abiding citizen, being a productive citizen, and being an employed citizen. Because, you know, one of the greatest crime fighters that I know of is employment. And most people, if they are clean and sober and employed, are not going to be committing crimes. If nothing else, you just don't have time to. So we send everybody to the Life Learning Center. It's not a taxpayer-funded organization at all. They rely 100% on donations, whether it's financial donations or donations of people's time to come down and be mentors. Everybody had supervision. Now, that's not to say that everyone was compliant. Some people walked in the front door of the Life Learning Center and walked out the back door, never to be heard from again. Many of those people are the reason that our jail populations crept back up to 500, is because of folks that were non-compliant with the terms of their release. But this is, you know, the Life Learning Center really bridged the gap where we have a problem with keeping people compliant with the terms of their bond, or even if they aren't posting a financial bond, which very few of these folks were required to post financial bonds, they still have to do some basic things like show up for court, like not commit new offenses. Those are the most basic ways that you have to stay out of trouble so that a judge doesn't lock you back up while your case is pending. And the Life Learning Center has provided some of the assistance and provided the supervision where there's a gap. Probation and parole in Kentucky only kicks in for supervision of folks that have been convicted after there's a conviction. But we really don't have a functional pretrial system, although we have one of the country's best pretrial systems in terms of monitoring people. We don't have any sort of pretrial assistance in terms of getting people jobs, getting them employed, getting them treatment. These are all things that we relied upon the Life Learning Center to provide for the folks that were involved in our justice system. And for the people that put forth an effort, we've had outstanding outcomes. Again, not everyone's complied, but overall, I think it's been a success.
Right. Rachel, isn't this, I mean, Isn't this something that we need more of? Don't we need, I mean, what are the barriers to this happening? I mean, like, what has the task force found? Like, what are the barriers to more, counties and states doing this sort of thing? And what role is there for the federal government to play in this? Because, I mean, Lynn said, I mean, when he came out, I mean, even that, I mean, it's like lack of opportunities, we do need community organizations to fill some of the gap here. So, I mean, what more can, the states do or the locals do, and how can the Fed support that?
That's exactly right. That's one of the biggest problems, just generally coming home from incarceration. Lynn really spoke to it well. There's so many things that we kind of take for granted, that we, have a driver's license or a car, the ability to get to work, childcare. And a lot of these things are already difficult to get when you've just been released from jail or prison, but then compound and add on to that this crisis where we see a lot of volunteers are not able to volunteer at their reentry type programs, and a lot of their reentry programs are being shut down. And here in California, you still can't get your license renewed in California with the DMVs being shut down. So what we're seeing is there's a willingness in our prison and jail leadership to want to send people home, but we need to provide resources to communities so that we actually have these resources met: housing, food, things like that we sort of take for granted are needed when people are released. And the federal government can help, and that's where some of this legislation that we're discussing right now, that's being discussed on the Hill right now, can play a part, is to provide some assistance with a lot of those resources.
Yeah, I mean, I would say even with compassionate release, we see that issue of, do people have a home to go to? I mean, Lynn says, he's got a support network, and luckily he got a stimulus check too. But, people go home, and if they don't have a family or a house or something, that makes it hard. And even when we worked on medical parole or geriatric release at the state level, that has been an issue, especially given the type of offense they might have committed. Is there the support in the community to release people? So sometimes it's, even if you can find the will to allow releases, there's not places for people to go. And so this gets to the holistic view that has to be taken about, what do we do with people in prisons and jails if we don't want them to come back? How do we support them so that they have a better path? What more can be said about that in terms of, things that you have seen?
Yeah, and I think, another thing that's sort of a small, silver lining here in LA, although we haven't seen great results in our prisons, our LA County Jail has taken a lot of steps to send a lot of people home, to reduce the population by about 29%, which is dramatic. And simultaneously, what we've seen in LA is a dramatic reduction in crime rates as well. And, a lot of that, I'm sure, has to do with the stay-at-home orders and a lot of these other factors. But one of the things that we're seeing is that while we are reducing our jail populations, crime isn't going up. And so I think that's also something to kind of keep in mind. Our LA County Board of Supervisors recently had a vote where they voted to ask our sheriff, how can we keep these numbers this low? Right now, our LA County jail population is at like 12,000, and our Board of Supervisors is now saying, okay, look, we can do this. How do we continue to do this and do it safely? So I think, we have to focus on the pandemic, and we have to focus on providing holistic help to our communities. But while we're doing that, I think it's important to look around at what we're seeing. And what we're seeing is that safely reducing our incarcerated populations works, and it does not place our communities at risk if we do it carefully and we do it the right way.
Lynn, I want to come back to you. You talked a little bit before about the challenges you had when you came back. I mean, and you said you also have some advantages that others don't in terms of a support network. I mean, do you know other people have been released, and what have been the things that you hear people, there's always the talk about short timers. As you get close to the door, you get nervous about, what things are going to be like when you get out, because there's the sensory overload of having been in prison for that long. And just, things have changed. The world's changed. I'm sure the phones are a little different, and things like that. So what are the things that both you and people you knew who were getting out, what were the challenges or hurdles that you thought they'd have to overcome, and what should people on the outside be thinking in terms of supports that need to be there? Oh, I don't know if you heard me. Lynn, did you hear that? Oh, you're unmuting.
I heard
Okay.
you, Kevin.
Okay.
Let me tell you what I've gone through the 4 months that I've been home. The 4 months that I've been home, I've had identification problems. I've had companies that want to hire me. They want to give me a job, and the companies are calling me. Instead of me calling, the companies are calling me and asking me, do you have your ID yet? After spending 25 years and 6 months in federal prison, when I get out, the ID photo with a federal prison written at the bottom of it with my birthday and all that on it, it would not suffice. So I talked to parole supervision, and they made an identification letter with my picture on it, with date of birth, social security number, and everything. And I went to DPS to try to take a driver's test. I did the online driver's education class. And when I got there, they told me, this is fine, but it won't work. We have to have a birth certificate, And for 4 months, I've been trying to get driver's license. I can't go to work because I don't have a driver's license. Jobs are available for me, and I just can't get to them because I can't get a driver's license. I got a guy sending me Social Security supplement checks and stimulus checks in the mail, but can't give me a Social Security card. When the check is based off of Social Security, why can't I get a card when I can get a check? And that's crazy. That's what you run into. For 4 months, I still don't have a Social Security card, but every month I get a Social Security check. That's a problem. It takes a Social Security card and a driver's license to get a birth certificate. So, the pandemic got all these places closed that I could walk in personally and get this settled and handled. But right now, everybody's working from home, so that handicapped me for being able to take care of it. Fortunately, unlike most people, I came home to a no-problem situation. My friends are set. They retired. Their homes are paid for. I don't have no bills or nothing, and it's no strain, no stress on me to be here. But a lot of people don't have that. After spending 20 years in prison, they don't get out to what I got out to.
Yeah, let me ask you something, because I know families are going to ask this. You were there. You were at Oakdale when it hit, right?
Yes.
And there's now it's been at Terminal Island and Lompoc. It's moving around different facilities, both state. I'm in San Quentin. We've seen it. So it's hitting different facilities. What is it like to be there when it's hitting? Because for families, the anxiety is through the roof because they think every positive test is a possible death sentence. And yet, we've seen in most of these places they'll have 600 cases and there'll be some fatalities, but it's not that. But you're understandably worried when you hear that it's hit a facility. What was it like being in there? How did you communicate with people outside about how you were doing?
Well, see, first of all, Kevin, we didn't know that it was the coronavirus, that was hitting. We thought like everybody just was catching the flu, people had the flu or something, And I lived in a dorm that was so congested with people that the head of my bunk touched the foot of my guy's bunk that's behind me, and I could hear him cough at night, and I could hear the guy at my foot cough at night, and we had to drape sheets and blankets over our head of our bed to protect ourselves. But we didn't know that this was coronavirus. We thought that, he just got the flu. So guys were going to the commissary buying cough syrup and flu medicine and cold medicine because they thought they had the flu or a cold or something. And then when guys got where they couldn't breathe and stuff, and they started to have to take them out, then we automatically knew that it was something way more serious, And then when guys started dying and we started seeing ambulances coming 4 or 5 times a day to the camp, then we know it was a serious problem, And that's when it dawned on me that I needed to start calling people and letting them know about what was happening at Oakdale, how serious it was at Oakdale, And they weren't prepared for it. No one had masks, gloves, nothing, because it seemed like they didn't understand what was happening to us,
Yeah, that was where they had the first fatality. That was Patrick Jones. Were you there when he passed away?
Yes,
Yeah. And people did they finally realize what it was at that point?
they did. They did, because what they did was they locked everything down. They stopped work stoppage and everything. But even when you stop work and you stop outside recreational purposes and stuff like that, it's impossible to social distance in an open dorm. You know,
Right.
we're all using the same facilities. You can't social distance, and this is one of the main tools for countering the coronavirus is social distancing. So we still breathing on each other and walking by each other and touching all those same things. So the lockdown didn't stop anything. The only thing that really helped me was getting out from over there.
Yeah.
The other thing is,
Okay.
the other thing, Kevin, is that the federal prison has contract health providers. The health providers in the federal prison don't work for the federal prison.
Right.
They're on contract, you know. They go home in the evening at 5 o'clock just like you do your regular job. Now, they're excellent health providers. Most of them have military backgrounds, but they don't work for the BOP. They work on a contract for the BOP, but they're not per se like prison guards. They don't work as a prison guard for the federal system. They go home at 5 o'clock in the evening. So what happens between 5 o'clock in the evening and 5 o'clock that next morning is on y'all. It's on the system, you know, and people die in the middle of the night because no one is there.
Right. No, we were hearing horror stories about that, and families not even knowing if their loved one's sick, or they're being transported to hospitals and not being told, and then the hospitals can't say anything. It's been a disaster. That's why those of us who are really working to try to get independent oversight of our prisons are pushing for that legislation, because there is just no way that families can deal with being, you know, not getting any information and then feeling like if they call or complain, that there's going to be retribution.
On the positive side of things, though, there have been several reentry organizations that have been in touch with me, that have reached out to me, that have told me, Lynn, if you got any kind of problem, if you need anything, call us. People sincere about trying to help us, trying to keep us out, to make sure that nobody backslides. There are a lot of organizations out there helping us. A lot of organizations. Someone calls me every other day. Somebody called me and asked me, Lynn, are you all right? Do you need anything? And that's big. So once the prisoners get out, there's a whole lot of help out here. If they release them from prison, if they let them go, if they just let them out, there's a whole lot of organizations out here that's helping, that's want to help. You know, like employment is no problem. They filed 45 million unemployment applications, but I've had all kind of companies calling me trying to get me to work, and I'm past 70 years old.
And they know you have a record, and that's okay.
Yeah, and they know I've been in prison. I'm talking about bona fide Fortune 500 companies like Frito-Lay, you know, and UPS, all these people trying to find Amazon, trying to find some people to work. Their problem is they can't find anybody that's going to stay on the job. They can't find dependable workers. And ex-felons tend to work. You know, they worked so many years when they was in prison, so getting out working is not a problem for them. So they hiring these people because these guys are working.
You're about to get a bunch of calls.
You're
going to get a bunch of calls for job leads from a bunch of our family members after this. I'm telling you that.
Yeah, they've been calling me for work. And the only thing stopping me from work, Kevin, like I say, is the Social Security office is closed. I can't get a Social Security card. DPS, you got to go by appointment. And the pandemic got appointment lines like 2 and 3 months in waiting to go to the DPS office. And these are the things that are handicapping me. I need ID. That's all I need is my ID.
Yeah. Rob, I want to ask you something. I mean, there's a big debate in the country, obviously, going on from police reform to everything else. But one of the biggest drivers, I think, at least as a value, is I don't love the word holistic, but a broader view of public safety, and this idea that somebody like Lynn comes out and there are people looking out to make sure that there's jobs and treatment programs and services. You said, you know, yours is like small town, you know, the people who are there, and you obviously have this relationship with Life Learning. Is it your sense that that exists in your community and in other communities where, you know, somebody's coming back from federal prison or state prison or something, they're back in the community, and there are supports there, like Lynn is talking about?
It's really on an individual basis, Kevin. There, one guy can get out and, like Lynn, have great friends, great family, great support system, lots of opportunities, and can really be a success story. And by all means, I never want to have to prosecute the same person twice. I want everybody to come out and want to go to work and have jobs. And I can't tell you how frustrated I am to hear somebody like Lynn say that he's out, he's doing what he's supposed to do, he wants to go to work, he's got job offers, and all he needs is an ID. And it's like, come on, this is the most basic thing we need government to do. If the government's going to require these companies to have a photocopy of somebody's ID in order to put them on their payroll, then the least the government can do is open up at least enough of the motor bureau or whatever it is that issues IDs where he's from to get that done. It makes no sense. Even if we have to start issuing state IDs to people on the way out the prison door, that's what we need to do. There's basic functions that the government, we're going to be stuck with coronavirus, it looks like, for quite a long time. Even if there's a vaccine, we're going to be stuck with it for a while because there'll be a lot of people that don't want to take the vaccine. The government's got to find a way to work with the coronavirus because not everybody's got the advantages and the resources that Lynn has had. Not every location has a life learning center. In fact, it's the only one in Kentucky. Not everybody's got good families to come home to. So I'm sure there's a lot of people that have gotten released, whether it's from state or federal custody, that need some hand up that aren't getting it. And you start wondering about their choices and start talking about public safety. And are we putting ourselves at danger by putting people back in a situation where they only have their old ways to go back to? If we aren't at least getting them a driver's license or a government issued ID, that's the kind of thing the government can do in terms of public safety that we're not doing. We've got to find a way, even with coronavirus, just like we've got people that are still sitting in jail waiting trial, we've got to find a way to get trials back on track, to open our court system back up. It's another fundamental constitutional right that the government has to find a way to do. And the IDs thing seems simple to me. That one is just mind-boggling how we haven't figured that out yet. But somehow we've got to figure out how we're going to work in the midst of this pandemic and still make the world function, make government function, because the world doesn't stop turning for anybody or any virus.
Let me ask you this. I don't know the answer to this, and I'm not meaning to put you on the spot. What do you people are worried about lack of visits. What is the jail able to do? Because I'm worried that for a lot of these facilities, they're going to lock down for a long time. And so you're going to have lack of visits. What are people inside able to do right now in order to keep contact with their family?
Our detention center is doing visits by Skype. And I think, you shouldn't quote me on this because I'm not 100% positive, but it normally involves some sort of cost to the inmate or their family. I don't know how it works because I haven't used it, but I think they've eliminated those costs because they've eliminated the in-person visits, which of course are for free. But now everything is by video, and I'm sure that that's not as attractive as an in-person visit, but it's certainly better than nothing. You can at least look at your loved one, know that they're alive, know that they're healthy, talk to them about what's going on in your life, what's going on in their life, get a sense of what's going on inside the jail. Because I think, it's been mentioned before that people hear about a positive test in a correctional facility, and it's like, oh my gosh, that's somebody that's dying. That's not necessarily the case. And certainly, a correctional facility is a very dangerous place to have the COVID virus, but it's not an automatic death sentence. And I think it would relieve a lot of the stress from the loved ones if, regardless of whether or not their incarcerated loved one has coronavirus or not, if they could look at him and see him and know, okay, he looks healthy or she looks healthy. Or even if they do have coronavirus, say, well, they've got coronavirus, but they're alive, they're breathing, they're talking, they're doing all right, they're getting through this. I think that would go a long way. And that would really narrow the number of cases where there has to be panic. Like you mentioned about not being able to get medical information about your loved one. Certainly understand how stressful that situation would be, but it would really narrow the number of cases where that's a problem if we had better communication, if we took advantage of technology.
Yeah, no, it's been mind-boggling to me that we don't do more of this.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about solutions, and Rachel, I want to go back to you just because there are proposals to do this. So I don't want to lose sight of that. I mean, again, I want to say to the folks who are watching, There is bipartisan legislation in the Senate, and that could expand compassionate release, which is what Lynn benefited from, and others could, so that they do not have to wait as long to get an answer. That also recognizes that COVID puts you at threat of, is a condition that should qualify you for compassionate release, and also expands the elderly offender home detention program. And then there's you mentioned the Nadler legislation, which we expect all of these to be part of maybe a COVID, emergency package, the next one, that could incentivize states and locals to do some safe incarceration. So we want people to be, we're going to ask you to get active in support of those things. Anything that I'm missing, Rachel, that I know
that's absolutely correct. And I'll just emphasize what Rob brought up. He brought up a great point about the sort of technological needs that states have in trying to figure out how do we do this, whether it be going to court without having to place public defenders and prosecutors at risk, whether it be Skype visits or visits with clients through Skype. There are a lot of quick needs for a lot of courts across the country to speed up their technological advances. And so that's another way that this bill, one of these bills being considered, would sort of provide assistance to states and local governments, because I think, there's a conversation about what the shutdowns and what coronavirus has done to the mental health of people in our country. Well, think about those who are incarcerated, who are now in solitary confinement, not seeing their family members, not having those visits. That is an exacerbated mental health crisis in our prisons and jails. That is also a punishment that was not contemplated and not something that the judge wanted, right? So you have now places, the safest places in our prisons are solitary confinement, and that places a huge strain on the mental health of people, even for short periods of time. And I think, never to compare the social isolation to that solitary confinement as similar or the same, but I think a lot of people who've experienced social isolation during this time have a new understanding of what that can do to a person. And so I think a lot of the ways that the federal government needs to get involved is to provide funding for things of that nature, technological advances. And then, one of the craziest things, we talk about just getting an ID. When we were working on legislation on the Hill, one of the things we found was that the Federal Bureau of Prisons couldn't talk to the states and would say, well, we're trying to get them an ID, but that state's ID processes like this, that state's ID processes like that. And so finding a way to utilize the federal resources to help the states do these things is so crucial and so important.
Yeah, and I can't tell you that even states that are doing video visits, and I've heard the objection to video visits because even that concept, it's not the same as a visit. And so it's, video communication, but it's, they don't work a lot of times. It sounds like a small thing, but it's in 2020, the idea that we can't, we can do this. We can do this, show with you all in different, all around the country and stuff. And then a loved one can't even talk to their family member. It is infuriating, and they're paying for it. And that's another thing. They pay for this normally right now in some of these jurisdictions. The fees are being waived, but they are looking at then, is that going to come back? Are they going to have to pay down the road? But so that's some place where it seems like financial assistance would be helpful. Lynn, I'm going to tell you this. I told you before we started that it was somewhat frustrating how young you look. And we're getting comments. We're getting fewer questions and more comments about how young you look, and and how much energy you have. So what's the secret to life? I guess that's the real question.
Before I answer that question, Kevin, I don't want to lose this point that I want to add to the discussion. There are a lot of people in federal prison who qualify for compassionate release, but compassionate release is not something that the government lets you know when you're eligible for. They don't volunteer and tell you you're eligible for compassionate release. So if you don't know, if you're not intelligent enough to read the law and understand that you qualify, if you're not liberal enough to file it yourself, then you're just stuck in there. And there's so many people like that that's qualified and just stuck in there because the system don't tell you. The system don't help you. They're not trying to get you out. They're not trying to let you know that you're eligible. They don't tell you, you know. So a lot of people in there that should be out on compassionate release, but they have no money, they have no attorney. I would still be in if the FAM attorneys, if FAM had not sent a lawyer down there to walk my paperwork to the judge, I'd still be in, you know. As for looking young, well, I couldn't afford to get old. I stayed so busy. Trying to get out. I was in a law library every day. I'm trying to find something. I'm up all day, all night, trying to find some kind of paperwork to get out, filing something, writing something, and staying active. And I think the key is like, you know, just staying very active. And actually, you know, the mind controls the body. If you think you're old, you're old.
All right, well, maybe that's my problem, because I feel old, but 71 and you're getting all these, you're looking for jobs. I mean, I don't know when you plan on stopping. We're towards the end. I usually try to give everybody a last word, and Rachel, since you're going to have to leave us shortly, anything last words you want to say, things we missed, anything else?
I'll just say thank you again for having me on this panel. I think one of the things I just want to end on is thanking Lynn for coming and telling his story, because one of the things that's so important as we go forward in these conversations is hearing from people on the ground and having the experiences. A lot of times, you know, we talk about bills, we talk about data, we talk about this, but if we're not hearing from the people who are impacted, we're not going to be gearing things in the right direction. And so I'm grateful to FAM for ensuring that that's always the case, and thankful to hear Lynn's voice today. So thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for joining us, Rachel. And if you have to go, whenever you have to. Rob, anything you want to say?
Thank you.
Congratulations to Lynn, man. You know, I love a success story. It might be unusual to hear a prosecutor say that, but you know, I think I speak for all prosecutors when nobody wants to prosecute the same person twice. We want everybody to get out and have the success that you have. And you know, if you can move to Kentucky, I will get you that ID and get you to whatever. And thanks to FAM for having me on. I know that, you know, my ideology doesn't line up perfectly with FAM's, but I respect your all's opinion, the work you do, and I appreciate you all having me on, listening to my side as well.
Yeah, no, we gotta, I mean, I always say this, in this country, we're a big, diverse country. We got to get to 50% plus one to get anything done. And we got to find ways to work together. I know it's a very polarizing time, but we don't, for the people who need help, we just need to get solutions. And so thank you for making time and doing this. And yeah, we don't agree on everything, but the stuff we can work on together, we really need to as a country. All right, Lynn, we got a question. Who was your attorney who helped you?
His name was Dennis Hester.
All right, he deserves a shout out.
He's out at Houston. He's out at Houston Public Defender's Office. His name is Dennis Hester. And hey, I read his petition. You know, I'm almost like paralegal because I've been reading law for like 25 years. And I read his supplemental brief in support of my petition. And I couldn't have gotten a better petition produced if I had gave him $100,000. He worked on it and did it like I had paid him $100,000. It was like excellent. I mean, it was so good, Kevin, that he was citing laws that had just been passed 2 months ago, you know, that he was using to support his arguments and positions, stuff that the judge just ruled on 60 days ago. So, like, I got to really give a big shout out, man, to Dennis. Dennis is an excellent attorney, and I owe a big shout out to FAM because it was through FAM that I got Dennis, you know, Juliana and Dorian. She, you know, she is a big person. She stayed with me, man, through all of this. Juliana.
Yeah, well, she'll appreciate you saying that. And I'm so grateful for you joining us. I mean, I know everybody gets excited to see someone like you come out and do so well and have such a good spirit. It's really inspiring to the families who are really worried about their loved ones. So thank you for doing this. I just want to say, yeah, sure. I just want to say that one thing that becomes clear when you do things like this is that changing the law does change lives. That it's not just work. It's, you know, the advocacy is to a purpose. If we hadn't changed the First Step Act to allow Lynn, you know, to have an attorney that could go to court and get this answer, he would not have gotten out. And so the changes we're seeking now to broaden the program and to add additional releases, it's important. It's not just, you know, inside baseball work. It will change lives. And so we'll be looking for support for these bills that are floating around now to at least during this period of COVID, to increase the release options. So I want to thank Rob, thank Lynn, Rachel's already gone, thank my team, and wish everybody a safe weekend, and we'll be in touch soon. So thank you.